The useful data is not copy this direct admission strategy or use this exact signal. The useful idea is that yield volatility requires.
You are listening to the Innovation Forge, the #1 podcast on adaptive enrollment management, exploring the data, marketing, and strategy that fuels higher education. Here's your host, David Dysart.
There's a particular kind of Slate build that feels impressive when it launches, and it's just confusing 6 months later. You know that one. There's a dashboard with 25 numbers on it. Everyone agrees, hey, this looks useful. A few people open it every week. Someone even mentions it in a meeting. But if you ask, what decision does this dashboard actually change? The room's gonna get pretty quiet. Or there's a model. It has a score, it has tiers, probably a color scale. It gets added to a query, maybe a portal, maybe a counselor list. But if you ask, when this score moves, what should someone do differently? The answer is vague. Maybe there's a campaign. It's clever, uses conditional content, it has good audience logic. It probably took a very patient Slate person a long time to build. But if the owner leaves, nobody knows where the logic lives, why the audience was defined that way, or whether their campaign is still doing what it was meant to do. That pattern showed up again and again as I worked through the Slate Summit materials. Not always directly, not always in the same words, but the pattern was there. The strongest work was not just about what Slate can do. It was about what institutional decision Slate is helping people make. And that's the question for this episode. What changes when we stop treating Slate as a configuration system and start treating it as decision infrastructure? Now, decision infrastructure is not something that every presenter said. This is what I'm seeing in the trend, though. It comes from reading across several summit sessions that were, on the surface, about different things. Change management, query-based views, yield volatility, and even origin source reporting. The sessions are Durable Change by Design, presented by Ben Parsons and Sarah Kotlinski from College of the Holy Cross and Gettysburg College. What a View, Query-Based Views for Quick Wins by Marzocchi from Suffolk University Graduate Admissions. Adapting to Yield Volatility by Catie Clark, Christie Smith, Olivia Nash, and Metcalf. From Nash, Alfred University, University of Pacific, and University of Tulsa. And from Rough Demo to Data Hit, Telling Your Origin Story, presented by Russell Goff, Ashley Valladares, and Kylie Hall, from Sherman College of Chiropractic and enrollmentFUEL. Those are the source sessions for today. I'm not going to read their decks back to you. That would not be useful, and it would not be fair to the presenters. Instead, I want to do the thing I think is more valuable for this podcast. And it's to put these sessions on the same anvil, heat the shared idea, and see what kind of practical tool we can shape from it. And the tool is this. Every serious Slate build should be able to answer 5 questions. What decision does this support? Who owns that decision? What evidence does the build surface? What action should change because of it? And how will we know if it's working? That's the episode. Let's see how it takes shape today. Welcome to the Conference Insights Engine, presented by the Innovation Forge. I'm David Dysart. I work in enrollment analytics and Slate strategy, and this series is my attempt to make the summit useful after the conference energy fades. The goal is not just to summarize every session. The goal is to identify patterns, spotlight the people who shared the work, and translate the ideas into something Slate professionals can work with today. Today's episode is the opening argument for the season. Advanced Slate work is moving from configuration into decision infrastructure. That matters because a lot of institutions are not short on Slate activity. They're short on clarity. They have reports, but not always decisions. They have campaigns, but not always governance. They have scores, but not always action rules. They have portals, not always measurement. Man, they could have workflows, but they don't always have ownership. Slate's extremely good at letting us build. That's the blessing. But sometimes it can feel like a trap, because if we're not careful, the instance becomes a workshop full of unfinished tools. Some are sharp, some are beautiful, some are dangerous, some nobody actually remembers making. The practical question is not, can we build it? The practical question is, what institutional judgment are we trying to improve? And that's where I want to start. Part 1, the pattern across the summit. The first session I want to anchor this with is the durable change by design from Ben Parsons and Sarah Kotlinski. Both have already been on the podcast as amazing guests. Go check out their episodes. But this session is important because it names something a lot of Slate teams experience but do not always say out loud. Change creates loss. A new workflow may be better, but it can still disrupt identity, habits, control, and even confidence. A new system may be more durable, but it can still feel like a threat to people who understood the old informal process. The session, at least as I read it, it's not just saying document your work. It's saying that human judgment, decision rationale, vendor context, contract details, and institutional memory should not only live in personal notes and chats or just even the head of the person who happened to build the thing. The session shows a concrete way to preserve decision logic in Slate, whether that's organizational records, custom datasets, forms, materials, queries, dashboards, or just review reminders. One of the useful examples in this session is that a vendor and contract structure. They show how decision reasoning, documents, review dates, and leadership visibility can live in a shared system, instead of just disappearing into individual staff memory. That matters because a lot of institutional decisions are not one-time decisions. They're reoccurring. Should we renew this vendor? Should we keep this process? Should we change the way we evaluate this relationship? Should we revisit this assumption? If the reasoning is not captured, the next decision starts from fog. My interpretation is that this is a model for more than just vendor management. It's a model for durable institutional judgment. Now compare that with Mara's What a View, Querybase views for quick wins. That session's much more technical, on the surface at least. It's about Querybase views. It includes practical examples around expensive reports, guardrails for less technical staff, integrations, ping reporting, and shaping data so that it can just be used more effectively. And beneath the technical work is the same question. How do we make the right evidence easier to use? A query-based view is not valuable because it's clever. It's valuable when it changes the way people access, trust, reuse, or even act on data. If a funnel report takes 20 seconds to load and now it takes 2 seconds, that's not just a speed improvement. It can change whether people use the report in the flow of work. If a view gives faculty or staff a safer, more limited population to query, that's not just a technical guardrail, it's a governance decision. If a view reshapes ping data or UTM information so it can be reported and interpreted, that's not just data plumbing. It's a way of making digital behaviors legible enough to support a decision. The build reduces friction between a question and the usable evidence. That is decision infrastructure. Now take the yield session, adapting to yield volatility using data and technology to shape the right class with Catie, Christie, Olivia, and Allie. This session brings the leadership context. Enrollment outcomes are less predictable now. Application behavior, demographics, MELT, competition, aid, policy, the student expectations even, are all shifting at the same time. The practical lesson I'm seeing is that the application volume alone is not a strategy. Institutions are trying to move from broad volume towards measured precision. Who's the right fit? Who's likely to convert? Where are the barriers? What does behavior tell us? How do we just test new channels or direct admissions approaches without pretending we already know the answer? What campus data should feed back into the yield work? The details differ by institution, but the broader issue is the same. Yield strategy needs infrastructure that lets the institution observe, interpret, and act while the cycle is still moving. If you only understand your yield story after May 1, you're doing archaeology. Sometimes archaeology is necessary, and I've done plenty of it. But the value comes when the next cycle gets better. And then we have from ref demo data hit from Russell, Ashley, and Kylie. The session's about origin sources in origin groups. It uses Sherman College of Chiropractic's journey to show how messy source structures can undermine recruitment analysis. The key distinction I took from that session is that origins should answer the initial hand raise. It should not try to carry the entire student journey on its back. It's a very useful piece of analytic discipline, because when source data is messy, institutions often try to ask it to answer too many questions. Where did the student first enter? Which channel deserves credit? What influenced the application? What campaign worked? Which event mattered? Which counselor relationship helped? These not all just the same question. If you build one field or one source taxonomy and expect it to answer all of them, the data will eventually lie to you. Or, more precisely, it will answer a question you did not mean to ask. The session provides a practical method. Audit current sources, identify gaps, map record entry paths, rebuild source groups, refresh records, wait for recalculation, and repeat. Again, on the surface, this is source governance. Underneath, it's that same decision infrastructure. If origin data is supposed to guide recruitment investment, travel planning, campaign strategy, or just channel evaluation, then the source structure has to be built for the decision. Not for vibes, not for tradition, not because a field has always been there. For the decision. Part 2. What these sessions have in common. These 4 sessions are not the same kind of session. One is change and decision governance, one's query-based views and reporting architecture, one's yield strategy under volatility, one is origin source cleanup and attribution discipline. But they agree on several things. First, evidence has to be shaped before it's useful. Raw data is not strategy. A slow report is not strategy. A source field with 900 values is not strategy. That predictive score without an action rule is not strategy. A contract folder that no one reviews, still not strategy. Evidence becomes useful when it is structured around a decision. Second, ownership matters. If nobody owns the decision, the build will drift. If nobody owns the query-based view, it becomes another mysterious object. If nobody owns origin source governance, new entry paths will create new gaps. If nobody owns the vendor review process, the dashboard becomes decorative. If nobody owns the yield intervention policy, the score or signal becomes a suggestion instead of an operating tool. Third, speed matters. But speed is not the whole point. The query-based views session includes examples where pre-computed views make reports and queries faster. That's valuable. But speed is only meaningful if faster access changes use. The yield session includes examples of testing and expanding approaches. Speed matters there too. Institutions cannot wait until the class is closed to learn everything. But faster bad decisions are still bad decisions. The craft is not simply moving quickly. The craft is building enough structure that people can act sooner without acting blindly. Fourth, institutional memory is part of infrastructure. I think this is where the durable change by design and from rough demo to data hit connect strongly for me. One is about decision reasoning and change. The other is about source history and analytic trust. Both are asking what happens when people who remember why this exists are not in the room. And that's not hypothetical. People change jobs, offices reorganize, consultants finish contracts, vendors change products, staff inherit Slate instances. New leadership asks old questions, but with that new urgency. If the system does not preserve reasoning, the institution is forced to relearn its own history. And that's expensive. And it's usually invisible until something breaks. Part 3. Why this pattern matters. This pattern matters because many Slate teams are entering a more complicated era. The work is not just send emails, read applications, run events, and count deposits. It's use behavior data responsibly, personalize communication without creating chaos, support staff action without overwhelming counselors, build dashboards that leaders trust, integrate campus data, track financial aid barriers, understand source quality, manage direct admissions or a new recruitment channel, use AI without losing judgment, extend Slate into student services, advising, advancement, or just graduate operations, train staff so knowledge does not live in one person. Whew, that's a lot. The natural response is to just build more reports, more campaigns, more portals, more rules, more data fields, more dashboards. But the Summit pattern suggests a different response. Build clearer decision infrastructure. That means each build needs to earn its keep, not by being impressive, by making a decision better, faster, safer, or more consistent. Most institutions have data. The harder question was, what did we need the data to explain? Where did conversion change? Which event behaviors mattered? Which source product movement? Which admitted student looked engaged but did not deposit? Which groups needed different timing, different messaging, or just different counselor action? The values, it's not just having a lot of tabs or a lot of measures. The value is whether it helps us make better cycle decisions. Where should we intervene earlier? Which signals are trustworthy? Which event investments are actually useful? Which student groups need a different yield strategy? Which communications are creating movement and which are just creating activity? That's all decision infrastructure. It's the same with engagement scoring and signal indices. A score is not the goal. The score is raw material. The question is, what is the institutional action threshold? If a student has high digital engagement but no deposit, what's the next step? If a student has low overall engagement but high academic fit, what should happen? If a student attended a key event and then stopped engaging, what's our next step? If a student's parent is highly engaged but the student's not, what do we do with that? If we can't just answer these questions, the scoring system is just a shiny ingot sitting on the bench. Useful, maybe, but not forged into a tool yet. Different stages need different evidence. Different owners need different views, and different risks need different interventions. That's the point. The system is valuable when it helps the institution decide what to do next. 4. The practical framework. So let's turn this into something listeners can use. If you're driving, walking, or maybe just cleaning your office while listening to this, you don't need a worksheet yet. Just hold the 5 questions. For any major Slate build, ask 1. What decision does this support? 2. Who owns that decision? 3. What evidence does the build surface? 4. What action should change because of it? And 5. How will we know if it's working? Let's walk through each of these. Question 1. What decision does this support? This sounds obvious, but it's also the one teams skip. A report might support a decision like which admitted student should counselors prioritize this week? Which source channels deserve more investment? Which event format should we repeat? Which student needs financial aid follow-up? Which vendor renewal needs leadership review? Which application population needs a different communication path? If the decision is unclear, the build will sprawl. That's how dashboards become junk drawers. It's how campaigns become tangled. It's also how source fields become unusable. A useful test is to force the decision into one sentence. This build helps us decide whether ... This dashboard helps us decide which ... The score helps us decide when ... This portal helps students decide how to ... If you cannot finish the sentence, pause the build. Not forever, just long enough to clarify the work. Question 2. Who owns that decision? This is where governance becomes real. A Slate object can have a technical owner and a decision owner. Those may not be the same person. The technical owner may build the query, the rules, the dashboards, portals, the campaigns. The decision owner is the person or group accountable for what happens because of it. For a yield dashboard, that might be the admissions leadership. For a counselor priority list, it's the territory managers or directors. For financial aid barrier report, it might be a joint owner between admissions and financial aid. Maybe for the vendor review dashboard, it might be operations leadership. For origin source governance, it might be enrollment analytics or admissions operations. If there's no decision owner, the build can still exist, but it's not going to have authority. And without authority, action becomes optional. Question 3. What evidence does this build surface? This is where the Querybase views and origin story sessions are especially useful. Evidence has to be shaped. That might mean pre-computing expensive logic, it might mean limiting the population, it might mean translating field values, it might mean separating current reporting from historical reporting, it might mean cleaning source work groups. It might mean deciding that origin answers the first hand raise and not the entire recruitment journey. The practical question is, what evidence should a user trust when they open this thing? Not every piece of available data, the evidence that matters for the decision. If the decision is counselor outreach, the evidence might be recent event attendance, portal activity, aid status, and application stage. If the decision is source investment, the evidence might be clean origin groups, inquiry to application conversion, application to admit conversion, admit to deposit conversion, its cost or just effort. If the decision is vendor renewal, the evidence might be contract date, cost, owner, use case, assessment score, upcoming review windows. If the evidence is not reliable, say that. A build that names its uncertainty is more trustworthy than one that hides it. Question 4. What action should change because of it? This is the most important question. A dashboard should not just say, here is what happened. It should imply, here's what we should consider doing. A score should not just rank students. It should define action bands. A campaign should not just personalize content. It should move a student towards a useful next step. A query-based view should not just make a query easier. It should make a process safer, faster, or just more consistent. For example, if admitted students attended a high-intent event but have not deposited, the action might be counselor follow-up within 3 business days. If a student has high academic fit but low engagement, the action might be a different communication path, not just more of the same drip. If a vendor contract within 90 days of renewal and has no current evaluation, the action might be a leadership review. If a source group has too many unmapped values, the action might be source governance before the next campaign analysis. This is where many builds fail. They produce information, they do not define the actual use. The forge metaphor here is useful. A bar of iron is not a tool because it exists. It becomes a tool when it has a shape, a handle, an edge, and a purpose. A report's the same way. Question 5. How will we know if it's working? This is where we need to avoid overclaiming. Not every Slate build needs a randomized control trial. But every important build needs some way to know if it was useful. For a dashboard, that might be usage and decision cadence. Are people using it at meetings? Did it reduce manual reporting? Did it clarify priorities? For a campaign, it might be movement rate, response, deposits, appointments, or just reduced confusion. For a query-based view, that might be performance improvement. Fewer query errors, safer access for less technical users, or just cleaner integrations. For origin source cleanup, that might be fewer unmapped sources, clearer conversion reporting, and better confidence in channel analysis. For that decision governance piece, it might just be fewer missed renewals, better documentation, faster onboarding, and less reliance on individual memory. One important caution. Don't pretend every improvement is causal. The yield volatility session includes interesting examples and numbers, but some of those claims need method and attribution review before anyone can repeat them as proof. It just means we should distinguish between promising evidence, operational examples, and verified causal impact. That distinction is part of mature decision infrastructure. Part 5. Comparing the sessions directly. Let me put the 4 sessions side by side. Durable change by design. It asks us how we preserve human insight and decision rationale through change. What a view asks how do we shape data so that the right people can use it efficiently and safely. Adapting to yield volatility asks how do institutions respond when old enrollment assumptions stop being reliable. From rough demo to data hit asks how do we make origin data answer the question it is supposed to answer. The common answer is not use this one Slate feature. That's why I like this cluster. The common answer is design the system around the decision. The Slate features differ. Organization records, datasets, forms, dashboards, query-based views, materialized views, ping, portals, origin sources, source formats, queries, direct admissions experiments, AI-assisted analysis, personalized admitted student experiences. But the architecture question is consistent. What are we trying to know? What decision depends on that knowledge? What structure will make the knowledge usable? Who owns it? How do we revisit it? That's the pattern, and it's a pattern worth taking seriously. Part 6. Specific next steps for listeners. Let's make this practical. Here are 5 things I would recommend listeners do this week. Step 1. Pick one build. Do not start with the whole instance. Pick one build that matters. A dashboard, a campaign, a model, a report, a portal, an event follow-up process, a vendor review process, an origin source structure, something people use or should use. Step 2. Write the decision sentence. Use this format. This build helps us decide... ... Examples. This dashboard helps us decide which admit students need counselor follow-up this week. This report helps us decide which source channels deserve further investment. This campaign helps us decide which students need a different message based on their stated interests. This vendor dashboard helps us decide which contracts need review before renewal. This query-based view helps us decide how to safely give less technical users access to a defined population. If the sentence gets awkward, that's useful information. Awkward is usually where the work is. Step 3. Name the owner. Write down 2 owners if needed, a technical owner and a decision owner. If you cannot name the decision owner, the build's at risk. Step 4. Define the action role. This doesn't have to be complex. It can be, if this population appears, counselor reviews it every Monday. If this contract is within 90 days, leadership reviews it. If this source is unmapped, it goes into a monthly source governance queue. If the signal is high and deposit is missing, student gets a specific follow-up. If this report loads too slowly, move the expensive logic into a scheduled structure. The point is to connect evidence to behavior. Step 5. Add a review date. Well, this is the most boring recommendation, but maybe the most useful. Add a review date. Not just for vendors, for dashboards, for campaigns, for query-based views, for source mappings, for predictive models, for portals, for rules. If the object matters, it deserves a review date. A build without a review date is a future mystery. Part 7. What to study in the featured sessions. If you want to go back to the source sessions, here's how I would study each one. For durable change by design, don't only study the change management framing. Study how decision rationale becomes structured data. Look at how the session uses organization records, datasets, forms, dashboards, contract documents, review windows, and decision rubrics. Ask how your office currently preserves decision reasoning. If the answer is Slack, email, memory, there's your opportunity. For what a view, query-based views for quick wins. Study the architecture criteria. Don't just ask, could we use query-based views? Ask, is this data expensive to calculate repeatedly? Does this population need guardrails? Is scheduled lag acceptable? Is the view temporary or durable? Does this reduce risk or only move complexity somewhere else? For adapting to yield volatility, study the posture. The useful data is not copy this direct admission strategy or use this exact signal. The useful idea is that yield volatility requires staged testing, connected data, behavioral interpretation, and a willingness to challenge volume-based assumptions. From rough demo to data hit, study the discipline of the analytic question. Origin data should answer a specific question. If you want it to answer a different question, you may need a different structure. And that's a lesson far beyond origin sources. It applies to almost every Slate field that slowly becomes overloaded with meaning. Closing. Let's revisit the central idea. Advanced Slate work is becoming decision infrastructure. That does not mean every build has to be massive. Actually, some of the best decision infrastructure is small. A clean source taxonomy, a fast view, a clear campaign map, a review reminder, a dashboard with 5 numbers instead of 50, a score with an action policy, a form that captures decision rationale before it disappears. The craft's not in making Slate do more. The craft is in making Slate help the institution decide better. And that's the first Conference Insights engine. Keep an eye on LinkedIn and Substack as I continue to share additional resources. The most importantly, though, go examine the featured sessions. Start with Ben and Sarah's Durable Change by Design, then look at Mara's What a View, then study Adapting to Yield Volatility from Catie, Christie, Olivia, and Allie, and then spend time with From Ref Demo to Data Hit from Russell, Ashley, and Kylie. Those sessions are doing different work, but together they point to a more durable way to think about Slate. Less configuration for its own sake, more evidence, ownership, action, and review. That's the Forge work. Thank you for listening to the Conference Insight Engine presented by the Innovation Forge podcast. Now, go pick one build and write the decision sentence. And remember to strike true. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grow the guild by rating and reviewing the Innovation Forge podcast or sharing it with a colleague who needs to hear about these creative crossovers in education. The best review or comment every month will get an ebook of my book, of course. Particularly great ones will also be featured on future episodes. Thank you so much for joining me in the workshop today. Remember to strike true, and let's forge something extraordinary together.
There's a dashboard glowing in a conference room, 25 numbers under fluorescent gloom. Everybody nods like the work is done, but nobody says what it changes when it runs. There's a model with the color scale, a score in a query, a polished trail, a campaign map with a hidden seam, and the builder left with half the dream. So put it on the envelope, let the weak part show. Heat up the question till the answers glow. Not can we build it, not does it shine, but does it help us choose in time? What decision does this support? Who owns the call when the numbers report? What evidence rises from the fire tonight? What action changes when the signal burns bright? How do we know it's working at all? Not just a dashboard nailed to the wall. Let's shine more truth, bring it to the forge, strike true. Slate will build what our hands demand, a portal, a rule, a campaign strand, but a workshop full of nameless tools can cut the hands that skip the rules. Origin tells with the first 10 rows, not every mile that the student goes. If one field carries every claim, the data starts entering under the wrong name. Clean the source, name the path, map the entry, check the math. With you can make a slow record move, a guardrail gives the work a groove. A fast report is only worth the spark if it helps us act before the room goes dark. Yield keeps shifting under our feet. The first stories come a little too late to read. If we find the melt when the cycle is through, we are digging through ash for what we should do. What decision does this support? Who owns the call when the numbers report? What evidence rises from the fire tonight? What action changes when the signal burns bright? How do we know it is working at all? Not just a dashboard nailed to the wall. Let's shine more truth, bring it to the forge, strike true. There's a student staring at an 8-gap screen. There's a counselor caught between hope and machine. There's a contract 90 days from review. There's a source unmapped and a story untrue. Name the owner, name the rule, write the sentence, sharpen the tool. If the signal is high and the deposit is gone, who calls the student before the week runs long? If the view is safe and the report is passed, who checks the choice that the data casts? A build without a date becomes a mystery. A score without a rule becomes noise. A report without a use becomes scenery. A choice without an owner is not a choice. decision does this support? Who owns the call when the numbers report? What evidence rises from the fire tonight? What action changes when the signal burns bright? How do we know it's working at all? Not just a dashboard nailed to the wall. This build helps us decide who needs a hand. This view helps us trust what we understand. This score helps us move before hope falls through. This review date keeps the old working. What decision does this support? Who owns the call when the numbers report? What evidence rises from the fire tonight? What action changes when the signal burns bright? How do we know it is working at all? Not just a dashboard nailed to the wall. Let's shine more truth, bring it to the fore. Strike true. Let's shine more truth, bring it to the forge. Strike true.